Miami Sports Talk up and running once again. Glad to have you here today. Jesse Stiers is here today. How are you, Jess?
I'm doing well. It's a actually mild Tuesday in Cleveland. I don't know about over in the South Bend area, but it's only like 70 degrees. Not a lot of humidity, so it feels good outside. I'm looking forward to being able to take the dog on a nice walk after we finish up today.
Yeah, that's something that, I was going to mention yesterday, the practice yesterday over at Notre Dame, a lot less humidity because it's not quite as hot these last couple of days. We weren't able to get over there today. I'll just give you the friendly reminder right off the top today. Hit the like button, rate, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff on your favorite platform. It greatly, of course, helps out Irish Breakdown. We've got a lot to talk about today. As always, we've got fall training camp rolling, and today was practice number 5, but we had no practice viewing today for the media. So we've been to 3 practices so far since the start of fall camp last Friday. How excited are you, Jess, just with fall camp off and going right now?
Fall camp is a pretty exciting time. You get to see a lot of the players that you've been wanting to see or hearing about. You get to see guys battle it out for the depth chart positions. And yeah, I mean it's the best thing that we're gonna get until the first game at Ohio State, and it's better
Yeah,
than
that's
it's better
exactly it.
than just the opposite of being in the dark in March, February, April, May type zone. So it's good to actually see some tangible things and not just talk about it as much right now.
All right, very good. Well, Tommy Guns 44 jumping in. Hey, Sean, you and my brother have the same first and middle names. I'm not sure how you knew my middle name, Tommy, but okay. I'm assuming it's Michael is what we're going with. So very good to hear that, and glad to have you along for the ride today, Tommy Guns 44. Lot we're going to talk about today. We've got these 3 Marcus Freeman sound bites in the queue right now. You're going to hear a little bit from Marcus Freeman. You're going to hear from Al Golden, the new defensive coordinator. You're going to hear from Tommy Rees, the offensive coordinator, of course, and also we'll be taking your questions once again if you have anything. So glad to have you as Tyler jumps in. Tyler Bangy, one of the regulars, but glad to have you. We've been to 1 full practice, 2 partial practices, and now remember, when we go to the partial practices, we get to see the first 5 periods. We're mostly watching position drills, so there's not a whole lot that can be taken from that, other than, in some instances you kind of get up and you get a little bit closer to the players and stuff like that. You can really kind of get an appreciation, for how some of the players, their size and shape differentiate themselves from, some of the other guys at their positions and those kind of things. So, we have been able to talk to Marcus Freeman as well as, again, offensive coordinator Tommy Rees and defensive coordinator Al Golden a little bit through these first few days of practice. And, once again, for the YouTube viewers, feel free to chime in with your questions. We'll do our best to get to those as well. So, Friday's first Marcus Freeman training camp practice ran about 2.5 hours. And so that included some extra position group stuff that they do before the actual practice begins. So technically, I think they say the practice goes 2 hours because they're bound to time limits and stuff like that. But they got they get the players out there. They're doing some different, position work and stuff like that. And then they start their stretching and then they get into, the actual practice and all that kind of stuff. It was not what I would call visibly physically demanding, what we saw, but there was, unlike what we were just talking about today in the last couple of days where it has not been humid. Those first few days, high humidity, and it took a visible toll on the players. You had some offensive linemen, both had to kind of tap out late in the practice. Blake Fisher and Zeke Correll, due to the humidity, they stayed out on the field, but they took off their helmets and jerseys and stuff like that. And then after the practice, Marcus Freeman had the team circled up and he was talking to them, fairly adamantly. And here's what Marcus Freeman said his message to the team was after that first full practice that the media got to see in its entirety last Friday.
It's not changing. We're not changing what we're doing, and it's going to be hard. We had a couple guys that couldn't finish practice today, and it's their job to make sure they're available for practice. It's the trainer's job to make sure they protect the player, And so I was trying to send a message to those players that, hey, whatever you have to do to make sure you're available for practice. We had a couple guys go out because of heat, and whatever you have to do to make sure you're available, we have to do it because we're not changing. Because I believe in what we've kind of scheduled out through this fall camp. I believe this is what we need to be prepared to go. And we're not going to change. We'll always look at and review and debrief and say, is there anything we can do to enhance? But the length of practice, the effort, the way we're going to challenge our players, that's not going to change. And so if they're looking for us to pull back, it's not going to happen. They have to continue to do whatever it takes to make sure they're ready to go.
I don't know if the reps that went to the freshmen were any more.
Yep. So that should have been cut off a little bit there. But, so there's Marcus Freeman talking about it's got to be hard. And I do apologize for the volume. I couldn't bump it up anymore, and I realize it is soft. And Marcus Freeman's a little more soft-spoken, I think, than Brian Kelly, who came into his first press conference last week, more like a bull in a china shop, I think, if you saw any of that with how he was addressing the media. But Jess, it's got to be hard. Well, what do you think hearing Marcus Freeman say that off the top?
When I was in training camp and when I was playing in college, our first couple of practices and especially training camp were the hardest practices that we were going to have. And it's specific, or it's designed to be that way for a reason, because you want the practices to be harder than what the game is going to be. So that by the time you show up to game day, it feels like practice. You already have things down. You have things almost kind of memorized, and you're going through muscle memory at that point. So if you can practice hard and set the tone for the entire season, that's the best way to do it. Practice is supposed to be hard. Individual periods are supposed to be hard. That's where you get your conditioning in. A lot of times you don't see as many college teams lining up to run full 100-yard sprints after a practice. And that's mainly because the conditioning itself of practice is what's going to get you in condition. And I remember when I was playing, individual drills in the first 30 minutes of practice were typically the hardest part of practice, because you're working through it, you're sweating through it, you're going through the drills, you're going 100%, you're working on your tackling form, you're working on your shedding blocking. That's for me, me personally at playing linebacker, but I agree that you got to set the tone early, and practice does have to be hard. So that way, when the season rolls around, you can almost go full go and not have any limitations. Your guys are going to be physically ready for anything that's thrown at them.
I kind of feel like, the early reputation that Marcus Freeman had, and you've heard him say it a few times now, I'm your coach, not your friend, like it came up in that Vegas video and stuff like that. And obviously they were having fun with it then, but he said it, I think, at another point in the press conference on Friday. I feel like this is also kind of a tone setter that he's getting. It's like, I'm still Marcus Freeman, and, in some cases the guy that recruited some of these guys, and he's got the great relationships and everything, but at the end of the day, he's still the head coach. Does it kind of feel that way to you?
Yeah, and I think the best head coaches are your friend, but when you step on the field, they become your coach. It's time to practice, it's time to go to work, and at that point, it's no longer Mr. Nice Guy, Mr. Cool Guy, because that's what he is. Marcus Freeman is a very relatable head coach. He's obviously a player's coach. Everyone respects him and loves him in those regards. But when practice starts, there has to be a difference between, Marcus Freeman outside of practice and Marcus Freeman inside of practice. So I enjoy that approach that he's taking. And oftentimes I think, like I said, the best coaches have that dynamic of where to draw the line of, okay, it's practice time, and okay, it's, non-practice time. I'm still going to be your friend, but don't take anything personal I say to you on the field, because we're all here trying to get better.
Yep, absolutely. And, so I think that especially for a first-time head coach who does have that reputation as, a quote-unquote player's coach, that is a tone that he needs to set early. And, from Marcus Freeman's perspective, he's still himself out there, it seems like. Like, you don't hear, when they're out there at practice, you really, you don't hear yelling and screaming Marcus Freeman. He's not changing who he is or his personality just because he's the head coach now. He's still moving around and, integrating in different spots out there on the field. And JT Bertrand kind of talked about it when we had a chance to talk with him yesterday, just the fact that like he still shows up, but it's more a matter of, like he's not the defensive coordinator obviously anymore, but he's sort of making sure that these guys are receiving the message that they're supposed to be receiving, understand what's being told to them, because, especially with the defense, because while there are similarities to his defense, there are changes. And as JD Bertrand talked about, it's almost like you learn a new defense. It's like you're learning a new language, is the way he put it. So Marcus Freeman is out there with the defense, specifically reinforcing things, but it doesn't, like whereas Brian Kelly sort of considered himself this offensive guru, like you don't see Marcus Freeman with his hands all over the defense just because he's got a defensive background. And I think that's important as well.
Yeah, I think it's important that Marcus Freeman lets his coordinators be coordinators, and that he allows himself to be a head coach, because this is a role that he's never had before, and it's hard because acting as a head coach is almost acting as an executive. Everyone kind of reports to you, and you delegate what you think and your kind of findings and how you think things are going, and then based off of that, the coordinators kind of tweak things respectively out of those comments. So I'm really interested to see what kind of, what that's going to look like for Marcus Freeman this year as a first time, full head coach. His philosophy behind, letting his coordinators coordinate and him kind of taking care of more of the high level head coaching decisions on a day-to-day basis.
Right. So now the bulk of the offensive work so far, again, this is from, what we had seen that first practice and what we had seen over the weekend, what we were able to see, the bulk of the work was coming in the red zone. And, it was like the 11-on-11 and the 7-on-7 stuff all done down in the red zone. And here's what Marcus Freeman kind of said was behind that.
Because it was very intentional. It really, I think Al Golden was the one that said it in the NFL. They kind of did that to really work the long running of the skill guys, right? And so I'm not trying to take it easy, but it's a progression in terms of how long our wideouts and our DBs are running. And so that's kind of where we started in the spring of we're going to start in the red zone, and then we'll work our way out to the middle of the field. And so that's why we did that. I mean, it went back and forth. It was really good to see. I think the defense has depth, and that's something to me that was noticeable. The offense, we're not as deep as we want to be yet. We'll continue to progress to that point. But it was good. You saw some good things from the offense and good things from the defense. In terms of Tyler Buchner, you know what? We all know he can run. So it's really good for him to progress in terms of being a passer, staying in the pocket, making good decisions, because it's always easy to take off and run.
All right. So there was kind of the whole thing, both the red zone and Tyler Buchner in there. Let's talk about the red zone aspect first, because like you were talking about how the position drills, can be so demanding early on. And again, it's almost like he's apologizing. It's like, I'm not taking it easy on these guys, because again, that kind of seems to be, for fair, unfair, the reputation that he got early on, just because of that whole player coach thing. But he's talking about, we're trying, and I think this especially made sense last week, as humid as it was, cutting back on, all, the amount of all the running that those receivers and defensive backs, the skill guys, have to do early on in camp. So you're not putting, all this mileage on them early as you try to make your way through camp, and they'll build up to that as camp progresses. What do you think about that aspect?
When I first heard of this philosophy of working in the red zone and, starting there and over time, they're going to work their way back, I've never heard of, a camp kind of being run this way. And it actually intrigues me. And it is something that I think makes a lot of sense because, you talked about the mileage of players. The way I look at it is you can start with your base kind of foundations of your offense and defense and really focus on, nailing down those kind of packages, and then use your building blocks as you expand out and work farther away from the end zone. So I really like it because it doesn't overwhelm the players at first, and you're also getting a good foundation down. And, as everyone knows, the red zone is the most important part of the field, defensively and offensively. Defensively, you're trying everything in your power to hold them to no points or, a field goal, and at worst, you give up a touchdown. And offensively, that's the most crucial part of the entire, the entire field. The entire part of the offense is getting down the red zone. And you hear a lot of NFL stats that are brought up of your efficiency in the red zone. How often are you scoring when you get into the red zone? And I don't really count field goals in those regards. I want to see touchdowns being put in. Those are what's going to win you the game. So I'm really, really interested / impressed kind of by what they're doing with this philosophy, because like I said, if you can nail down these kind of base foundations and this zone of the field, which is the most crucial part of the field, I think working your way backwards helps with, one, the mileage, and two, having a better understanding of the offense and defense before you open up all this space and allow for potential error.
Yeah, where you're kind of forced into a tighter area, and I think the decisions are, one, more important, and two, there are fewer options for you down there in the red zone. So I think it's a really interesting way of doing things. And Jason asked, talking about the red zone and why practices that I asked Coach Golden about that philosophy. Did not get a chance to yesterday. I got a couple of questions and was hoping to come back around because, as you can imagine, there was a big gaggle of people, so I think most of us tried to limit it, to a question or two, so that everyone could get in, and I got mine in. I was hoping to come back around at the end and bring that, the red zone stuff back up, but did not get to. So there is your, pedantic explanation of how things work in the media cackle over there at Notre Dame. But Marcus Freeman also you heard him talk about Tyler Buchner in that soundbite, and he talked about, look, we know the guy can run. We want to see him throw. They were keeping him in the pocket more in those red zone situations. Vince and I talked about yesterday, there was one opportunity where things kind of developed to the left a little bit, and he ended up, there was a huge running lane where he could have just tucked it and run and probably scored a touchdown with his speed because there was so much green in front of him. But instead, they didn't really want him doing that. So instead, he made the good decision, just to throw it high out of the back of the end zone, live to play another game. But, so I guess your thoughts on just sort of the development of Tyler Buchner and, and them kind of working on that passing aspect, because as we know, that's really the biggest question that everyone has about Tyler Buchner after we saw him last year. We know he can run, but I think what everyone wants to see is just how accurate specifically and what kind of decisions he makes as a passer as well.
Yeah, I really like the concept of keeping Tyler Buchner in the pocket during these red zone drills. Because like Freeman said, everyone knows he's got legs. That's kind of the easy part of his game. That's the natural part of his game. And everyone knows, based on last season, the thing he needs to work on is his accuracy in throwing the ball. And that's most critical down in the red zone. You can't be throwing interceptions, and you have to be super accurate with your balls. And I think that that's a good practice for Buchner, is making him stay in the pocket, read his routes, and be able to either, one, make a good throw, or two, like you said, live to fight another down and get rid of it. In game situations, will he probably try to extend with his feet a little bit, or, maybe roll out with the pocket a little bit? Yeah, sure. But right now it seems like the emphasis is really focusing, on getting Buchner's throwing mechanics down, and more importantly, his throwing accuracy where it matters most, and that's in the red zone.
Yeah, and look, has he been 100%? No, but starting with the decision making, that's the biggest thing. And again, we've got one live session to go on, and we're only going to get one more during training camp. Then in addition to these, smaller practice viewings. So a week from Friday, August 19th, is going to be the next time we get a full practice. So that'll be our next and final opportunity, probably, to really see things live during camp, to see, to have something to compare to, where they started from on day one compared to where they are 2 weeks down the line on the 19th of August. So that'll be kind of the one that we've got circled on Friday the 19th coming up here, again, a week from Friday. But I've been impressed, or I was impressed with the decision making that he had. And, despite the fact that most of the hand wringing right now seems to be, about his throwing mechanics, because everyone's looking at the videotape or the pictures, and they're like, oh, I hate his arm slot. He's down here, he's doing all this stuff, and the ball goes up and everything. Everything I've seen so far, I've been impressed with his accuracy. He's not throwing the ball all over the place, especially on the short passes where like for him, because he does have a little bit bigger arm, like you would expect that the short passes, a la Brandon Wimbush a few years back, might be the place where he struggles the most, but that has not been a thing. Again, in the times that we have got to see him, that was not a thing. But again, this is something Vince and I talked about yesterday, just the mechanics. What I said and what I will stick with is, at this point in the game, you're in training camp now. So as long as the ball gets from point A to point B the way it's supposed to, accurately, it doesn't matter what it looks like getting there, and you can't be thinking about mechanics at this stage in the game, because it's just too hard at this point. You're in training camp already. It's just too hard to try to change someone's mechanics once you're in camp and you're preparing for the season. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like any pitcher or hitter. Once the season starts and once you're in camp, you had all summer to work on those things and kind of get into what you feel is a comfortable position by the time camp gets there. So to me, I have no problem with what the throwing motion looks like, especially because we are at the college level. I think it would be different if we were talking about an NFL starting quarterback and his throwing mechanics. But we're talking about Tyler Buchner at Notre Dame as his first year, being a full-time starter potentially. So the things I'm looking at are not necessarily his arm slot. I'm looking at, is he getting the ball from point A to point B with accuracy, and is he getting it there with velocity? Now, if his arm slot created, potential where his balls are behind people, or they're not getting, the timing routes aren't there, or his wide receivers aren't getting to the ball on the same timing as he is, then I would consider it an issue. But if his balls are getting from point A to point B on time with accuracy, with good zip on it, I have no cares about what it looks like.
Yeah, I completely agree. And again, if like once you try to start tweaking mechanics, once the season starts, then you're thinking about, well, I've got to do this and I've got to do this, or your footwork or whatever. That's all stuff that needed to be ironed out coming in, because whatever happens, if you're trying to correct it week to week, all that's going to happen when you get into the game, you're going to revert to whatever your muscle memory is, and it's not going to matter. And to me, it's a non-issue for right now, unless we see something else that says it is an issue. I didn't see anything in the first three practices we got to see that says it's an issue. Is it completely orthodox? No, but again, neither was Phillip Rivers, Baker Mayfield. There are a lot of different quarterbacks who don't have perfect throwing mechanics, and you've got guys like Patrick Mahomes, because of the kind of athlete that he is, who can just change, his arm slots all over the place. And I think that there's probably a little some of that with Tyler Buchner in there as well, because he is a really good athlete. So I'm not as concerned about what that arm looks like. I'm just, again, the concern is, does it get to where it needs to be? Does it have the arm strength to get to be, that it needs to be? And from everything that I've seen so far, it's been yes. So I'm not as concerned about that as a lot of people seem to be right now.
You brought up another good point. And, the last thing a quarterback wants to be thinking about during camp, during practice, during games is his throwing mechanics, and people telling him about his throwing mechanics, because that's just one more thing that he has to think about as he's going through his thought process of reading defenses and making the right read. So I would have to believe that, not letting things go for now, like we were talking about, his mechanics are only going to be, what they were coming into camp. At this point, there's no reason to tweak it. There's no reason to mention it, because like I said, that's just another thing he has to worry about potentially when he's trying to progress through his reads.
All right. So moving on from Marcus Freeman, we did get to talk with Al Golden, defensive coordinator, yesterday. And I hope this audio is a little bit louder than what we had with Marcus Freeman. But so we got to talk to I talked to JD Bertrand first, and I asked him about where are you taking your reps and that stuff right now. What's the split of your reps? And I've got the question that I asked him up front, and I'll let you hear the answer to it as well.
JD was saying that the linebackers are kind of being encouraged to, move around to different positions. Are you sort of mixing and matching with that?
I think that's
now?
true at every position, not just horizontally, position-wise, but also vertically, depth-wise. So if we have a PM walkthrough, we'll take, a 1 and put them with the 2s. We'll take a 2 and put them with the 1s. We'll take a 3 and put them with the 2s. And the idea there, and really Coach Freeman has kind of charged us with doing that to make sure that we add depth. We have guys that are communicating with other people, not just the ones. And I think it's making us better. If we do get an injury in a game, somebody's a little bit more apt to go in there and be successful. So there's a lot of opportunities. And from the kid standpoint, the morale is great because on any day, you could be the guy the 3 that's playing with the 2s. You could be the 2 that's playing with the 1s. And I think that's really helping us in terms of having guys, just continue to compete and try to improve.
It's really kind of unique because, like Vince and I, that first practice out there, when the players went out on the field for any 11-on-11 type stuff, it's like, okay, we're writing down numbers and we're trying to figure out, okay, here's the depth chart, and then, like 1 minute, you've got one group of linebackers out there, and the next play, it looks completely different. And we're like, hold it, who's the 1s? Who are the 2s? Because you've got all these really unique combinations out there. And again, like Jess, you played defense. Obviously, you were a linebacker and played some different positions. What did you think? Kind of hearing Al Golden explain it that way.
I really like the idea and the things that he started to present there. And I'll tell you why, because first of all, it's not necessarily, as linebacker, if you're at the Sam, if you're at the Will, if you're at the Mike, you're at the Viper, it doesn't, he's not doing that essentially because he thinks that those are where those guys are going to play. He just wants those guys to be thinking all the time and knowing, in this play, in this read, where that linebacker would be at. The one thing that's hard to understate on defense is you have to know where all your other guys are going to be in order for, the play to be funneled to where it's supposed to, designed to go. So for that reason, I think, he's doing these things so his players have a better understanding of the defense and they can play multiple positions. And I think another thing he's doing, with interchanging 2s going with 1s and 3s going with 2s is you have to be ready at any point as a linebacker to be able to step in and be ready to, fill that role and not be intimidated by it. So if you can do that early in practice, that's a big advantage, because what if a guy goes down and immediately, you're standing on the sideline and your name is called, you have to be ready to go in at that moment, potentially with guys, if you're not doing it this way that you've never, run reps with. I think it's just
right.
A comfortability
Who knows
thing.
Who you're going to be next to. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
It's just a big comfortability thing of, at any given time, this player could go down, or we might need you on this play for, for maybe a couple snaps, or this package or this formation for a couple snaps. So it's not necessarily, this is how it's going to be. It's just getting the guys comfortable with the defense, and then also getting them comfortable with any potential situation that could arise during the game. If a guy catches a cramp, a guy breaks an ankle, whatever it might be, these guys have to be ready to step in at any point and be comfortable and not, be a deer in the headlights, essentially.
Yeah, and I would think again, like he's talking about, sometimes the 3s are with the 2s, or that kind of thing as well. I would think that from a depth chart perspective, and it's not just linebacker, like he said, it's at all positions, where they're doing this to try to build more depth. And so like the safeties, for example, when you've got all these guys at safety back there, and the linebackers, because you've got this kind of line with the linebackers. And I'll have a story coming out about JD Bertrand, or actually I just put out the Al Golden notebook, and it's got some of this stuff in it. But, I guess my point is, like, you've got this line of linebackers, you've got all these veterans, but you've got a lot of really young guys too, like 3 really good freshmen and, sophomore and Prince Khali. So, like for those young guys, who don't have a lot of experience to be able to get in and play next to some of these veterans and have some of these veterans kind of, help them learn on the job. I think that, again, kind of like what Al Golden said, it gives them some buy-in, but it also gives them some invaluable learning experience as well to be able to learn hands-on from these veterans out there on the go.
Yeah, exactly. Those are both, good points. And I think another good point is if you have safeties working at corners and you got inside linebackers working at outside linebackers, these are guys who are getting to develop some of their weaker areas, maybe playing in some coverage, playing out more in space. So that by the time they kind of get back to their original position, things become just a little bit easier. And I think that's what Al Golden is really just trying to overall accomplish here is things are just a little bit easier the more diverse you can be on the field. And so I really think putting these guys in different positions and kind of getting them out of their comfort zones or maybe some of the roles that are typical for their position and getting out of those is really going to benefit them in the long run, because there's no such thing as being able to do too much on the football field. You want guys who can do just about a little bit of everything.
Possible. Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Exactly. Interesting thought. This crossed my mind because we had someone ask about Steve Angeli yesterday, number 3 quarterback right now on the depth chart. And I always think quarterback is, just obviously different from any other position, but he's a little bit in the same kind of situation that Tyler Buchner was in last year, true freshman coming in. Not expected to be the starter, but there's a future for Steve Angeli. So I guess my question is, as the number 3 quarterback, could you see any benefit to applying this approach to the quarterbacks as well? So those guys lower on the depth chart are getting more than a handful of live reps out there. What do you think about that?
I think it's extremely beneficial, especially for a guy, of his talent and his young age. Is getting him in there and getting him to learn as soon as possible. Is there's nothing ever wrong with that. As long as you're not obviously taking away, reps from Buchner, but if you're getting guys in there and just helping them develop, I think that's great. And it goes back to kind of what I was talking just a little bit ago is, what if a quarterback goes down and then, what if Buchner goes down and now all of a sudden who's your backup? Okay. And then, maybe Pine takes a stinger, gets a concussion, then it is time for a third string quarterback to step in. So I'm all for getting, as many reps as you can, reasonable reps as you can for some of these younger guys, because you just never know when when their number may be called. And, obviously you don't want guys to go down. And if that's the case and no one does get hurt, well, that player is already that much more further along with their understanding of, how things are run, the offense and how it's run, and being able to be comfortable with some of those players just in case they are thrown into a situation like that.
All right. Interesting. So, see, I guess for me, it's the balance of Pine and Buchner are up there competing to beat number 1. So are you taking away from those opportunities where, those guys are actually getting ready for games? Like if, again, I don't know what the amount of snaps would be for Angeli, and it's also not like he's not getting any snaps. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying, like you move him up maybe for a play or two, that kind of thing. So, okay, more Al Golden. Everyone is, or at least most everyone, I think, intrigued, might be the right word, with 5-star freshman linebacker Jalen Sneed. So Golden got a couple Jalen Sneed questions yesterday about his development. Let's hear what he has to say about the 5-star freshman linebacker.
I have a lot of excitement about Jalen Sneed. I think he's very, very talented. And if he can continue to develop and just submit to the process of just learning every day and improving every day and get some consistency, it's going to be really good. And I'm really, really excited about him as a student athlete. And he's physical, he's fast. He's fun to be around. He just has to catch those guys that are in front of him, those guys that have so much experience. Those guys are trying to mentor him and help him, and hopefully we can keep getting him going down that same path.
there like a specific area? Because I know he did everything for his high school defense, and the knock, I guess, kind of was that he wasn't able to focus on one thing. Is there one thing that maybe he's
but he's gotten better. Like I was even looking at today, like his box reads are better. Like it's hard. Like if you're out there playing in space all the time, now you're in the box, and so his box reads, his ability to see pullers and tight ends going back and things like that in the box is getting better. So he's so young. So nothing but positive energy, for him. And he's just starting his journey, and just gotta whatever we got to do to make sure that he's learning and improving on a daily basis. I think that would be for James and I, that's what we're trying to get done, is really see in the next month if we can't really see how far we can push him to get him better.
And when he says James, of course, he's talking about James Laurinaitis, who is a graduate assistant, but, is kind of the de facto linebacker coach as well, because while Golden is the linebacker coach, James Laurinaitis is doing a lot of the on-field work as Golden, obviously works on bigger picture aspects of the defense as well, with, installing his system and all that kind of stuff. So again, Jess, you've got the linebacker background, and, for our listeners and viewers watching on the YouTube feed, you can see Jalen Sneed's body type and what it looks like. Anything stand out there listening to Al Golden talking about Jalen Sneed?
Yeah, it's actually surprising that Jalen Sneed has more issues with box reads than he does have playing in space. At least for me, the hardest part was, first you have to diagnose runner pass, and even then, you might see a pulling guard, and it still could be a pass play with some of the RPO plays that happened today. And so I think that is something that is beneficial for him, because if you can play in space, getting your box reads down is going to be one of the easier, parts of things. And I really like the physical kind of makeup, or, the body composition of a guy like Jalen Sneed. He just looks fit. He reminds me at first glance of a guy named Jalen Smith,
right,
who was just athletically, you saw him on the field and you just knew how good he was just by looking at him. You didn't have to see him play. And that's the first impression I get of, looking at Jalen Sneed is, this guy can probably play anywhere on the field and just be an overall athlete. So for me, being able to work in space is definitely an advantage. And then being able to dial in those box reads are only going to escalate his game. And something I want to bring up is, freshmen these days, you can still, I don't know the exact amount of games, but you can play three or four games and still get a red shirt. And I think that is something that, Jalen Sneed might have the potential to do towards the end of the season. Is, he's only going to get better because all of his physical tools are there, obviously. So he's only going to get better the more he learns this defense and the more he learns his reads and his cues. And so, I think we might be having a different conversation 2 or 3 months from now, because I think Jalen Sneed is a guy who could potentially work into some nickel packages or work into, some late season playing and still be able to have that red shirt. And, it's a good assessment tool for these coaches too, is, seeing him out there in live action and seeing what he can actually do. So I really, really, really like what I see out of Sneed, and I really think that he has a potential role by the end of the season.
Yeah, and I wonder, because this is a 5-star guy, and we know the athleticism and the talent and everything he has, he's not quite like Jalen Smith, where he just comes in and he is playing right away. But like you're talking about preserving the eligibility, like I could see them taking their time early on, because the Rover, for example, is deep enough. And I was Chi-Town asking you if you could see Sneed playing Rover. I think it's deep enough right now between Kaiser and Botello, and what they can get out of that if they can continue to, get, as Al Golden was talking about, the athleticism and the desire and everything else is there. It sounds like, there were a couple keywords, consistency being one of them. It's just, being able to make those basic reads that he needs to be able to make, especially if he's going from, outside to inside. And I don't think there's a need to rush him, I guess, is what I'm saying. But at the same time, you could see, especially, like you get some guys banged up here and there, and maybe an opportunity presents itself where you could see him, out there on the field extended time, by midseason and maybe going forward. I think that is very conceivable. What do you think about him at the Rover? Because again, like playing in space seems to be more his forte, and that obviously plays to the Rover position.
Yeah, I think he would obviously be very well suited for the Rover position, but like you talked about, there's so much depth there at the Rover position. So I think what should be considered is how can we fully or potentially utilize him based on all the other pieces that we have right now. And that's a very good point. Is he reminds me of a more athletically gifted JOK. I think the way he can play in space like that. And, a lot of people
would longer.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of people don't understand about playing, the difference between it might seem easy from going from like an outside linebacker position to an inside backer position, but one of the hardest things is you have so many pre-snap reads that happen. Getting in the right alignment. Based on this formation, my heels are at 4 yards. Okay, in this formation, I'm at 4.5, and I'm just a shade outside of the nose tackle. There's so many things that happen before the play actually starts where you have to make a read of what the offense is doing in live time. And that's another thing that he has to learn too, is just based on formation of where he needs to be lined up at, where his heels need to be, what he's keying in on, for certain reads, where to line up based on where the strength of the offense is at. There's so many other, factors that go into a play before the play actually starts. And I think that's something that I think Golden is getting at with the consistency, is him making his pre-snap reads and in play reads as well, because those are both important things. And it's a lot to take in, especially going from high school to college. The speed of game just intensifies so much. So if you're lost in your pre-snap reads, you have no chance once the play actually starts.
Yeah, exactly. And like I could see, again, maybe this doesn't happen on day one or even in the first month of the season, but like Al Golden was asked about Jordan Botelho yesterday, and there are so many different things that he can do, between dropping back into some coverage when he's playing Rover or rushing the passer. Like I could easily see, and we have had a question about who's going to play Viper. I mean, you basically got Isaiah Foskey and Justin Adamalola there at the Viper. Jordan Botelho is the number 2 Rover, as of right now, behind Jack Kaiser. But again, with all these guys cross-training and doing all these different things, like I could easily see Isaiah Foskey lining up on one side of the defensive line, Jordan Botelho lining up on the other side of the defensive line, like on third down. And then you've also got, maybe Jalen Sneed sitting there at Rover, assuming his pass coverage is where it needs to be. Or, he's like a third rusher for that matter, depending on what you want to call. So, there are places where I think, for an athlete like him, where he can fit in. And again, like, when you listen to Al Golden, that's part of the reason for some of this mixing and matching and doing all this different kind of stuff, so they can find out, a lot about these guys, and, and again, give some of these younger guys the chance to learn from the older guys. And, we're still in week 1 of training camp. So I'm sure that there are a lot of possibilities that are going to end up coming out of all this.
Yeah, you bring up another good point, kind of what we were talking about earlier. Being able to mix and match and have guys play at different positions, you can truly optimize your defense the way you want to. And I talked about this last week. College football, especially kind of nowadays, you see kind of more of those hockey line shifts, especially, more so in the defensive line. And, if Notre Dame could potentially do that at linebacker, that's never an issue. Having depth and having, more explosive bodies per play is never going to be an issue. So the more you can mix and match these pieces and find, this for this specific down and yardage, we like this package, or for, this specific formation, we like this package. I don't think that that's a bad thing, because the more you can mix and match your pieces, the more and the more athleticism and overall talent you can get on the field, it's only going to lead to better things.
Yep, I completely agree. And again, we're week 1, so there's a lot of intrigue that's going to come out of this, and we're not going to get to see everything, because they don't want Ohio State to see everything. They don't want a lot of these.
It's always funny when I see like these NFL training camps, and you see the Notre Dame football Twitter account, tweeting out stuff. It's like, are you sure you want to let that much information out? Because you have to know that, the Ohio States and, the Buccaneers of the NFLs, they have probably people whose job it is to go find as much information as possible and report back with what they find. So it's always a very fine line for me of like, how much are you showing and how much are you willing to show?
Yeah. Good point. Good point. Guess what?
Rapid fire.
It's rapid fire time. That's right. So here's what an anonymous head coach told Athlon magazine about Notre Dame. Quote, the quarterback is more of what they want in that system. They're better when they can run around at that position. End quote. Do you buy or sell that?
I buy that for the type of offense that Brian Kelly wanted to run. I think Brian Kelly's offenses ran better when he had a quarterback that could use his feet a little bit more and be a little bit more mobile. I don't know if I'm ready to buy that for the current, Tommy Rees. This is Tommy Rees's first year as kind of in charge of the whole thing. I know he's been the offensive coordinator, but he still had Brian Kelly breathing down his neck, the last few years. And he's the head coach. And at the end of the day, he has, the ultimate say. If a play gets called in and he doesn't want it, he's not going to call that play. So I think I need to see more this season as, Marcus Freeman's first year as head coach, Tommy Rees taking full control of the reins and seeing what this offense kind of looks like, because this is going to be Tommy Rees's offense. So how that's designed, I hope that's designed around Buchner's talents, which it should be. And yes, Buchner can run the ball, but I think in the past, Brian Kelly's offenses seem to run better / he wanted quarterbacks that could be a little bit more mobile in the pocket.
No, I mean, that's a great point. It's like what people are used to seeing from this offense, is Brian Kelly's system. And, I do think that he wanted a mobile quarterback, and they've got Tyler Buchner. But as we've talked about a lot before, and we didn't get a chance to get to today, we were going to talk a little bit more about like Tommy Rees and some of the things that he's looked at. But this is, it's going to be a Tommy Rees offense, and what Tommy Rees is so good at is playing to the strengths of the personnel that he has. But specific to this team, a mobile quarterback is going to help this team run the ball better. And, one, it's a good sign that it sounds like Logan Diggs is going to be ready for the Ohio State game and not, have to wait until a month into the season. At least that's the plan for right now. We'll see when he actually gets out of the red jersey at practice and, is actually able to kind of absorb some contact. But we saw when, again, it was package stuff, but we saw what Tyler Buchner can do with the ball in his hands, and, that read option and the fact that now it's a very viable threat that the quarterback is going to pull that thing and he's going to take off for 50 yards downfield. I think that opens up a lot of things because, again, one of the biggest questions about Tyler Buchner, just like in the Virginia Tech game last year, when it's 3rd and long and you've got to convert a first down, what's he going to be able to do? Can he complete that pass? Is he going to be able to, make the reads quickly enough? How accurate is he going to be? Well, it's a well-known fact, and, you can speak to this as well, that the better you run the ball, you naturally become better on 3rd down. You're in more manageable 3rd down situations. And so he can help that greatly. So, I agree to what you're saying. Like, this is a Tommy Rees offense, but specific to this quarterback and the kind of dynamic playmaking that he brings. And I mean, look across college football, for the most part, you've got a lot of mobile quarterbacks out there. And so I think that he can really help take this offense to another level with what he's able to bring.
Yeah, I mean, not only looking at the college level, but look at some of the last, 4 or 5 years of the elite NFL quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. What do all those guys have in common is they can use their feet as a last resort if they need to. They can pick up those yards if the pocket is collapsing. They can roll out and make throws on the run. So I don't think it's a dig, at Notre Dame that their quarterbacks are more mobile and more of the running type. But you also hit a good point earlier, and this is why I've been kind of preaching this, is Notre Dame needs to establish the run game so they can get to 2nd and 5, 3rd and 3. So those passes for Buchner are very manageable because, like you said, what is Buchner going to do when it's 3rd and 12 and the whole stadium knows you're passing?
Right.
That's going to be his hardest situations this year. And I think that's where we're going to see kind of his talent level and his growth is what is he going to do when the entire stadium knows that the run is not an option. I get it, every now and then you run a 3rd and long draw or whatever, you try to catch, teams off guard. But what can he do when the entire stadium knows that he is going to have to pass the ball? And, I think that is going to be the biggest question mark this year, because if they can establish the run and get into some short down situations and really let him, kind of work off those RPO looks and still be a threat to run the ball, but also be able to throw with accuracy on 3rd and short, I think that's how they're going to have their most success this year.
Yep. I'll go ahead and use this. I was going to use this in the first segment, but I'll go, since we're kind of on this subject right now, I think it's worth bringing up with Tommy Rees and kind of, he tries to stay ahead of the curve with what he's done. So here's a question that came up with Tommy Rees in his latest media availability a couple of days ago at training camp, and just listen to the kind of studying that he does.
Trends year in and year out defensively that we'll spend a good deal of time on in the offseason to understand, because usually it's a 2-year buffer period. You see something 1 year, the second year, that's when everything's going to start happening, right? We saw that with the 3-5-3 and 3-3-5 defense over the last couple of years. That will evolve. Watch a ton of opponent film, probably more college film this year than in the past. I've always kind of trended myself towards watching more NFL game and more of that type of system, and I certainly did, like last year I watched every snap of every NFL team.
Wow.
So, but this year that wasn't the priority. There was other things that we were prioritizing. We want to constantly try to find new ways, and we have a great staff that brings ideas that all have other areas to study, and collaboratively we try to find new ways to enhance what we're doing.
How many different college offenses do you think, or defensive, or either college systems did you look at this offseason?
Yeah, defense we focused on a couple that were very specific, and then offenses, there was probably 6 or 8 that you dive into, and probably 6 or 8 more NFL teams that you try to do a study on and find what fits you and find what doesn't, right? I mean, it's fun. I don't know, like maybe not for everyone, but like there's worse things to be doing with your time.
So, Jess, I don't know about you, but when I listen to that and I hear the fact that Tommy Rees watched every snap of every NFL team last offseason, not this summer, but last summer, and, he's watching proactively, other college teams as well. It's for me, it's not hard to see how he is able, again, to play to the strengths of the personnel that he has, because he's looked at virtually everything at that point. It's like, oh, I can do this with this guy. I can do this with that guy. What do you think?
No, I think that in especially in college sports and more specifically college football, it's an adapt or kind of drown type of situation. Is, like he was getting at, defenses are always ever changing. They're always finding ways to kind of come at you and disguise the looks. So you have to kind of almost be ready for a lot of things. And offensively, we've talked about this before, especially at the NFL level. It takes, like the Lamar Jackson, he really succeeded the first year because there was no film out on him. Mm-hmm. Once the film is out there and there's everyone watching, there are so many great minds in college and NFL football who can schematically, over time find a way to beat you. And so
that's kind of what he was saying, it goes in those 2-year cycles kind of thing.
Right. So as an offense, you have to do something that is kind of shaking things up year by year, or else teams are going to have the tape on you and they're going to know exactly how to defend you. So I really appreciate and kind of respect his commitment on that level of, one, being prepared for what defenses are going to be throwing at him year in and year out, but then also being able to change up the look of his offense year in and year out. So that way defenses, have a little bit harder of a time against them, or they present things that they might not be prepared for.
Yeah.
And that's when you get a defensive coordinator on the sideline with the dry erase board going crazy because, it's not a play that you drew up. The whole week of practice is you scout and you have just about every play in their playbook, and how you're gonna defend it. And so when a team comes out with something you've never seen before, all hell kind of breaks loose because you can't really blame the players. Well, you can, but at the same time, they weren't practiced to defend that play. And so obviously the offense saw something and came up with that design to exploit defensively what you were going to, how you were going to line up to that play.
Yep. Okay. ESPN.com has an article up, and they rank schools based on how they churn out players at each position. So they rank the top 5 schools for each position on the football field. So basically they're determining this is quarterback you, this is running back you, that kind of thing. And, so they did it starting in 1998. So the last 24 years. And some of the criteria that went into this ranking, schools got points for all conference and all America selections. They got points for being drafted, weighted by round, so obviously if you had a first round, guy get drafted in the first round, that weighs more heavily in your favor. Success at the next level was a factor, but for that, they only took the first 4 years of a player's NFL career. Here's the thing, though. They ranked the top 5 schools at every position on the football field. Notre Dame did not make the top 5 for either tight ends or offensive linemen. What do you think about that?
When I first saw this, I was kind of like outraged because I was like, how is Notre Dame not on this list, considering it seems like the last, 10 years or so, all they've done is, spit out tight ends, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, and occasionally, some other positions here and there. But then you start to look at, this goes back to 1998. In the late 90s and early 2000s were some of kind of the darker years for Notre Dame until Brian Kelly got here with Tyrone Willingham and Charlie Weiss. And yeah, sure, Tyrone and Charlie both had a couple, good seasons here and there. But, Charlie Weiss was all about what kind of offense was he throwing out there and, what kind of playmakers was he putting out at quarterback and running back and wide receiver. And so when you look, when it goes back that far, yeah, I kind of understand them not being on the list. But if you look at the last 10, 15 years and you can't mention Notre Dame for offensive linemen or tight ends, well, I think you're kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, now I didn't go and here are the top 5 tight end schools, according to this article. Miami is number 1 with 13 tight ends drafted since 2000. Okay. Iowa's number 2. Stanford is number 3. Florida number 4. Missouri is number 5. Okay. So Miami had 13 tight ends drafted since 2000. So again, they started this data, or, they started this thing. They went back to 1998 rather than just 2000. Notre Dame's had 14 tight ends drafted since 1998. 5 in the second round, 1 in the first round, 1 in the third. Now, they didn't have any All-Americans, but Tyler Eifert was their highest drafted guy. The unfortunate thing for Tyler Eifert, of course, is the fact that, he had all the injuries early in his career. When he was healthy those first 2 or 3 years, he was producing like nobody's business, but he just couldn't stay healthy and ultimately, couldn't stay on the field. But, you go back, Anthony Fasano, John Carlson, Kyle Rudolph, drafted in the second round, still playing, Eifert, Troy Nicholas, Ben Koyak, Durham Smythe, Alize Mack, Cole Kmet, Tommy Tremble. I mean, there's a lot of, I don't know that I'd say relevant tight ends, but there were a lot of, second round tight ends. Missouri is number 5 on this list. Now, again, I didn't go back and look at every tight end for Missouri drafted since 1998, but I've got to think that Notre Dame's list is more impressive than whatever Missouri's going to throw out there,
Yeah, I think what's really hurting Notre Dame in these situations is the fact that they got points, or the scoring was based off of all conference and all American. And I think that's what hurt them is they've had a couple standout guys like Eifert and Rudolph, who I don't know specifically if they were all American or, all conference or any of that stuff. But I would have to assume that they were in those conversations, but the rest of those guys, not really. So I think that is where they're getting kind of maybe dinged, is the fact that they don't have, those All-Americans, but at the same time, they have the quantity. They have the people getting drafted year in and year out at the tight end position.
Yeah. Offensive line, Alabama's number 1 on this list. 20 offensive linemen drafted just since Nick Saban took over in 2007. Wisconsin, number 2. I mean, they're basically known for their offensive lines. Ohio State, number 3, followed by Oklahoma and Michigan. Okay. I mean, pretty good company there. Notre Dame's had 22 offensive linemen drafted since 1998. 6 in the first round, 3 in the second round. Since 2014, really, since I think they have really, to me, become one of the premier offensive line schools in the country. Now, again, that's basically about a third of the time that we're talking about in this span that goes back to 1998. But still, 4 first-round picks Notre Dame has had since 2014, 3 second-round picks, 2 third-round picks. And, of course, those guys that we're talking about more recently, like go back to Ryan Harris. There's a Super Bowl champ with the Broncos. But, like Zach Martin, first-round pick, because the first 4 years of a career are what's weighted in this thing. Well, Zach Martin was a first-team All-Pro in each of his first 4 years in the NFL. He's been first-team All-Pro 5 times, second-team All-Pro once. He was on the 2010s All-Decade team, and he was drafted in 2014. So he played a little bit more than half of that decade, and he was on the All-Decade team. So 8 years he's been either first or second team All-Pro, not just Pro Bowl, but All-Pro 7 of his 8 years. Quentin Nelson, of course, number 6 overall pick, first team All-Pro 3 times, second team All-Pro once. That's his entire career right there. He's either been first or second team All-Pro. And then, of course, you've got like Liam Eichenberg, a second-round pick, Mike McGlinchey, who was an all-rookie selection, drafted 9th overall in the same draft as Quentin Nelson. So, again, I realize it's a lot more recent with those guys, so maybe that hurts Notre Dame, when you track it against some of those other schools like Michigan and Wisconsin and those schools that they've got ahead of them. But again, it just seems really hard to fathom that when you've got 22 offensive linemen drafted in the time period that they're talking about, that they're not worthy of at least being in the top 5. And, oh, by the way, they did win the Joe Moore Award, just a few years ago as the best offensive line in the nation. So, go ahead.
I think an interesting metric to maybe look at here is not past success, but maybe success once you get into the NFL. I think that's the metric that would be more valuable because it hits on, the Quentin Nelsons, the Tyler Eiferts, the Zach Martins. I think it's more because a lot of times these schools get guys drafted because of, their reputation as a school. And I'm not, Notre Dame really can't use that as a crutch because a lot of, they're nationally recognized and stuff too. But when you're Alabama and everyone knows that you've had good linemen, for the last 5 years, maybe the 6th year, that guy isn't very good, but he's getting drafted because they've been good the last 5 years. So yeah. I think what you have to look at is success once you hit the NFL, not just getting there and your college stuff, because, quite frankly, that's not to say that that's the easy part, but the hard stuff really starts when you're in the NFL and everyone's a professional. How are you playing when everyone is a professional?
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so John Bon Jovi came to Notre Dame's training camp over the weekend to give the Irish a little pep talk. Maybe you saw the stuff on video. They were doing the karaoke, living on a prayer and all that good stuff. So you're closer to the age of the players, on this current team. You're in your mid-20s. So what entertainer would you want to come see fire the team up if you were going to make the choice?
See, this is tough because there's so many different ways you can go with this. And you also kind of have to look at, the backstory of Bon Jovi and why he's relevant to Notre Dame and all those things and the accessibility of getting him there and all of those things. But if we're talking about today's modern era, I think you have to go with maybe an entertainer that is more relatable or maybe of the music genre that a lot of these players listen to. And that's, more of the hip hop, pop kind of stuff. And so that's the kind of entertainer I would look at. I don't know if I have a specific name, but I know that those guys would, someone of that caliber would bring more juice or more energy to the players and potentially kind of get things fired up. And not to say that John Bon Jovi was kind of is corny in some regards, but to some of these players, and especially in these guys, they get younger and younger, and Bon Jovi just gets older and older. And so it's like, how many of these guys actually really know a Bon Jovi or maybe even listen to one of his songs? So I would just have to go with someone who's just more current, maybe someone who's guys listen to, you hear the music that they listen to when they're warming up or in the locker room or that kind of stuff. So that is kind of the route I would go that I think would really kind of like get these guys hyped up and get them fired up, as if, like a Drake came to the practice or, someone of that kind of statue. But then again, it's like, how are you going to get him out to a Notre Dame football practice? So it's like, I had a hard time finding the line of what was reasonable and who would still excite the players at the same time.
Yeah, I'm not knocking John Bon Jovi at all. Don't get me wrong, because like Bon Jovi was huge back at the end of when I was in high school. You had Slippery When Wet, their biggest album, and Living on a Prayer and Wanted Dead or Alive and all that stuff on that album. But it's just odd now, like looking at John Bon Jovi and instead of the frizzled 80s perm hair that he had, you've got gray hair, long gray hair coming out of the bottom of the cap, and that's kind of what stood out to me, is seeing him up there in front of those guys. It's just like, like Charlie Weiss brought in John Bon Jovi, it's been like 16, 17 years ago, and he was blaring Bon Jovi at practices and all that kind of stuff. So it's the age demo is maybe a little bit off, even though Jesse Bon Jovi, played here just a few years ago, and he came back with his dad over the weekend and all that stuff. It's always cool when you can get a big celebrity like that. But like I said, I just think that maybe so like even Will Smith, like for all the Will Smith stuff, like Will Smith might fire him
or
up.
like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, or like
there you go.
Like like a Kevin Hart, yeah, he's funny, but he also is very inspirational at the same time. So those are guys who I think might be a little bit more feasible, who are deemed kind of entertainers. The Rock can fire up just about anyone.
Yeah, for sure. Just that outfit that he wore before the Super Bowl last year.
I hated it. The maroon on maroon. I still talk about that. I was talking about that like 2 weeks ago. Someone was like, "Hey, do you remember when The Rock opened the Super Bowl?" And I was like, do you remember him wearing that monochrome burgundy color? Like, who goes, I hate monochrome, but then to like go with a color like burgundy for the Super Bowl, it's just very strange.
Yeah. Oh, John Cena. Okay. I don't, that's a pretty good one right there. Salty, you're right. Gray hair does happen to all of us. And that is one of the reasons that I'm wearing a hat right now. So I'm not knocking gray hair, because I'm just a little bit younger than John Bon Jovi myself. Again, I'm closer to his age demographic. Like if it was me in college 30 years ago, John Bon Jovi makes perfect sense back then. But I'm talking about 18 to 22-year-olds. I think that maybe there's somebody else that they might be able to relate to a little bit. Kenny says, agree. The Rock would be great. I think you might have hit the nail on the head with The Rock.
Yeah, everyone keeps bringing up that he's a Miami guy and the U and all that stuff. He's past that. The Rock is kind of, I just think he's a very kind of inspirational, likes to help and talk to as many people as possible, and just kind of share, his story and where kind of hard work and dedication can get you.
Yeah, Brian says if Snoop's son would have come. As a Kansas alum, do you remember what happened when Snoop went to KU a few years ago? They had the stripper poles out, and I don't think Snoop is ever going to be back again. So that might not be the way to go here at Notre Dame.
Yeah, the Snoop's not invited to any PG-13 events anymore.
No, not at all. Fill in the blank. It's blank that Pat McAfee is going to do Manning cast-like broadcasts for 6 big-time college football games on ESPN2 this season.
I think it's fun that, Pat McAfee's going to do this. And I don't think that there's a better person to do it, because Pat McAfee brings that energy every single game. And these are going to be big time games. So I think he fits the role perfectly. I think, he's good at what he does. He has, that nothing can embarrass that guy. I don't think that he's kind of built for situations like this. He enjoys the big stage. He likes being up there. He likes being able to share his enthusiasm with the people. I think it'll be a little bit different than the Manning cast, because obviously the Mannings are a little bit awkward and, kind of more reserved. Eli more so than Peyton. But yeah, I just really think that it's going to be a good time for everyone. I think there's going to be the excitement. I think there's going to be the insight. I think there's going to kind of be the no filter situation. So I'm all in for it. Overall, I think it's going to be a fun time.
I think it will too. I'm really anxious to see these, and like for that matter, Pat McAfee might have been the answer to the last question as well. Like he's probably someone, that younger players, could relate to. He's got the playing background. He does his own thing. He's got a huge platform. He's out there, both in podcast and just everywhere. And of course, he's got the connection to Aaron Rodgers as well. And it's interesting. I was reading about how this happened, and apparently, a lot of these different platforms like Amazon and some other places came in, and they basically like sent in the executives with their little PowerPoint presentations about here's what we can do for you if you do something like this for us, and all this kind of stuff. And McAfee was just kind of like, I'm not really in on any of that. And then Peyton Manning came in. This is going to be Peyton Manning's production group, Omaha Productions. This is going to be an Omaha production thing. So it's the same production company that produces the actual Manning cast is going to be producing this McAfee cast, whatever they're going to end up calling it. And because of the relationship that Peyton Manning had, that's how this whole thing came about. So I'm really, he is an X factor, man. He is somebody who talks differently and does things differently. And, he's not someone that you kind of put in a corner. And so I think it's going to be really fun to see this. And again, he's going to do it on ESPN2 for 6, what they're saying, quote unquote, big time college football games this season. So I'm really anxious and curious to see what this is going to look like. Like maybe it's even going to be the season opener when Notre Dame plays Ohio State. Who knows if they're the big time games, maybe they do something for that, because that's going to be on one of the ESPN/ABC channels. I assume it's going to be on ABC, but that's obviously what owns ESPN. So I'm all for it. I want to see what it's going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, same. He's going to have my viewership. I know I'll at least tune in every time that he's on. And I mean, that's the whole point of it. Create something that, produces viewership.
Yep. All right. Well, we will go ahead and wrap it up with that tonight. Jess, always great to have you on. A lot of great insight, especially on a lot of the defensive stuff that we were talking about tonight, and look forward to it. We'll, we've got more training camp obviously coming up. We've got some practice availabilities coming up this weekend, and looking forward to you chiming in once again next week.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. This is honestly my favorite time of the year. I love, the training camp. It's only going to get better from here. The more we're only going to have more to talk about. And I think that, the sound clips were great today. Hearing that insight into being able to talk about, the things we hear is always a good time, but it's only going to get better from here. This is like scratching the surface. We're just going to kind of get deeper and deeper and deeper. So I'm interested to see where that takes us.
That's right. Just getting started. We're still in week 1 of training camp right now, so we've got a ton more stuff coming up very soon. Don't forget, hit that like button, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. It helps out the Irish Breakdown channels. We appreciate you stopping by for today's show, and we will talk to you once again tomorrow. Vince will be back tomorrow, and so he'll be in. We'll talk to you then on IB Nation Sports.